Well, I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day as we start another week during this awful pandemic. My name is Ari Middleman. I'm the founder and publisher of Balkan Insider. It's good to see such diversity as more and more participants are joining very promptly. I'm sure that as we get a few minutes in, even more who are running on Balkan Standard Time will join us. Balkan Insider is the only morning newsletter that covers this fascinating region, this corner of Europe that we all know and love. And we decided just a few weeks ago to allow for these kind of virtual conversations for folks generally based in Washington to get to know folks worldwide. We've had participants from across the region, as well as certainly London, Brussels, Canada, and beyond. We're joined today by Ajla Delkic, someone I've known for the better part of the decade, who is actually at her office in Washington. It's been quite a while since I've been at my office, but Ajla is joining us from literally across the street from the White House, and I'm hoping that she can maybe start the discussion by sharing a little of what her organization does, how it came to be, and then how she assumed the helm of it. So Ajla, the floor is yours as quite a steady trickle of participants continue to join us.
Thank you so much, Ari, and thank you to Balkan Insider. I enjoy reading it every morning, and thank you for the news every day. And thank you to Ryan as well, who helps run things. I'll start off by, I guess, talking a little bit about the Advisory Council for Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's an organization that was started by a group of Bosnian Americans about 13 years ago. They were living in Washington, D.C. and realized that our community needed a seat at the table. As you know, during the war of aggression against Bosnia and Herzegovina in the 90s, our diaspora was very small in the United States because the majority of them did come to the US as a result of genocide and ethnic cleansing. And with that said, however, we were very lucky in that various organizations did advocate on the behalf of Bosnians at that time. A lot of Jewish organizations and leaders such as former Vice President Joe Biden, former Senator Bob Dole, who really were advocating for the lifting of the arms embargo on Bosnia and for the US intervention, which eventually President Clinton did decide that the US should intervene, and the US-led NATO effort did put an end to genocide and ethnic cleansing against Bosnia's non-Serb population. So because of that, I think our diaspora, the Bosnian American diaspora, is so incredibly indebted and so grateful to the American people and the American government for all that they did because it really saved countless lives. And I would say that the US is Bosnia's biggest friend and ally for sure. So with that said, the Advisory Council for Bosnia was started to educate members of US Congress on issues that are relevant to our community. And we want to see Bosnia as a member of NATO and the European Union. We want to see less corruption in Bosnia. We want to see a better economy for the Bosnian people. And obviously we want to see less, or we want to put a stop to genocide denial and the revision of history, which has sadly been on the rise just in the entire region, I would say. So,
thanks very much for that overview. Tell us a little about your personal background. This is quite the position you have, and you've built it over the years. But how did you land in Washington?
So I'm originally from Prijedor, Bosnia, and I came to the United States. I was ethnically cleansed from my hometown, and I lived in Florida. That's where my parents live. And then I came to DC for grad school. And while I was in grad school, I met the former executive director of the Advisory Council for Bosnia, Elmina Kulasic, who was running the organization at the time. And we obviously also have a very active board of directors. And it's a group of people that they volunteer and they really help out a lot. And I started volunteering and going to events. And then after she left the position, it became available. I applied and had a bunch of interviews and got the job. And I've been here since. So.
And the rest is history, as they say. I think it was in the month of May, but correct me if I'm wrong. Perhaps it was April. But your organization kicked off 3 years ago, as I recall, in 2017. A very impressive annual gala. The first year had Vice President Biden as the honoree, and I was honored to be there. And maybe you could just speak, because I think we're all kind of pulling and grasping and looking for happier memories as the last 2.5 months have dominated. Tell us a little about those events and how they came to be, and then in general some of the other programming, offline, non-pandemic programming that the organization's done in recent years.
Absolutely. And so for our 10th anniversary, we decided that we wanted to organize a gala. And we, as you remember, we were also celebrating the 25th anniversary since Bosnia's independence. And we invited Vice President Joe Biden to be the keynote speaker, because during the war, as I said, he really was very instrumental and a huge advocate for the end of the genocide and ethnic cleansing. So that was actually his very first speech after leaving the White House, and we were incredibly honored that he attended. We also honored Senator Bob Dole. He's also someone who I would say is a huge friend of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Bosnian people. He was a former Republican senator from Kansas, also ran for US president. And we honored him as well, among others. And I would say that, we organized it to really thank people who stood by the people of Bosnia during our toughest times. And that was sort of the message of the event. And then the following year, we organized another gala, and we had former President Bill Clinton speak, and former generals, and we kind of focused on the U.S. military that year to also thank them for all they've done. And then last year, we focused on women leaders. So we honored individuals such as Ambassador Maureen Cormack, who was the U.S. ambassador to Bosnia, first female U.S. ambassador, Major General Linda Singh, who runs the Maryland she's the head of the Maryland National Guard, and our keynote speaker was Ambassador Swanee Hunt, who was negotiating the Dayton Peace Accords, and she was actually the U.S. ambassador to Austria at the time, but because there was no U.S. embassy in Sarajevo during the war, they kind of shared a space in Vienna with her. So she was really heavily involved in the peace process. And we also honored Bosnian American U.S. Marine Captain Maida Zeng. And we always pick out a Bosnian American member of the U.S. Armed Forces, because we want to showcase that our diaspora, we did come here as refugees, but we've really integrated into the U.S. quite well. A lot of Bosnian Americans are small business owners, they're doctors, lawyers, police officers, teachers, and they serve the U.S. Armed Forces. And so we really thought it was important to highlight
that. That's actually, it wasn't a question I was going to ask, but well, I guess I'm perpetually curious, as people tell me. But are there any estimates? We're in the 2020 census year. For those joining in the U.S., we know that every 10 years we have a census. So are there estimates generally of how many Bosnian Americans there are across the country?
I mean, the estimates are about 200 to 250,000 Bosnian Americans throughout the country. Our largest community is in St. Louis, Missouri. And then we have a lot of Bosnians in Chicago, New York. I mean, we're really everywhere. Atlanta, Phoenix, Seattle. We're just kind of all over the place. Boise.
And of those, it's primarily individuals and families who were resettled 20 20, 25 years ago?
Yes, I would say we do have a diaspora that's over 100 years old, but I would say the overwhelming majority of Bosnian Americans came here as a result of genocide and ethnic cleansing in Bosnia.
Now, you brought up, I guess it wouldn't be a discussion about Bosnia if the word Dayton, referring to Wright-Patterson Air Base in Dayton, Ohio, didn't come up, and we're marking the 25th year of the Accords. I remember, unfortunately, the last time I was in Sarajevo was 5 years ago for the 20th anniversary commemoration.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious, as you take a look back at the last 25 years, your personal thoughts, or maybe more accurately, your organization's thoughts on Dayton, realizing that it is certainly not perfect, and dare I say, what the next 25 years could look like.
Well, I think, even you were at the gala with where President Clinton spoke, and even he said that it's not a perfect document, and it was never meant to. It's not a document that should be there forever, right? It should be. There's a lot of room to change things, because it does. I think it was necessary at the time because it did stop a war, and we haven't had a war since. So that in itself, I think, is a huge accomplishment, and that's definitely very important. But at the same time, it did give Bosnia, I think, an enormous too much government. It gave Bosnia way too much government, and a lot of room for kind of corruption, and not a lot of incentives for the politicians to step aside, because it did create kind of so much government. People are comfortable in their chairs. They don't want to move, and it really has paralyzed the country, I would say, sadly, to where it has to be reformed in some way for the country to move forward.
Yeah, I look, from a pure public administration academic perspective. I do think Bosnia is fairly unique, with multiple layers or levels of onions that need to be peeled away. That being said, it does seem incredible, taking a look over the last few years, the rapid economic growth, generally like most places in the world, in the bigger cities and in the capital city. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that. It seems, dare I say, almost in spite of the various levels of government, there just seems to be a lot of energetic, entrepreneurial, primarily younger folks, and then, for that matter, maybe working with the various levels of government, all sorts of foreign direct investment from a host of places that we see across the region, and maybe more acutely in Bosnia from Gulf Arab investors.
Yes, and I think Bosnia has a lot of potential. It has a lot of smart people, willing people. Unfortunately, there is that element of corruption, and I think that prevents a lot of businesses from thriving. But I do sense that there's a desire, and obviously a need, and I think hopefully we'll see more and more investors coming into Bosnia, because the other option is what, failure. So Bosnia really needs to improve upon some of those things. And I think a lot of the young people, you have a lot of young people leaving, but then you also have a lot of young people going back and starting businesses. And I think that's really refreshing to see. And we want to see more of that, obviously, and the advisory council is very supportive of Bosnian Americans who want to go back to Bosnia and start a business, who want to invest. I think what their worry is corruption, obviously, but at the same time, you have plenty of people who have been able to navigate the system and succeed, and I think that's really, those are the stories that are important to highlight.
It seems like a long time ago. I wasn't too long ago. It was 15 years ago. My first trip to Bosnia was in January 2005, and I took a road trip down from Osijek, Croatia, where I was living, to Brčko, and even a little further to the south, to the I'll use the term infamous Arizona market. Um, and it's just incredible what commerce can do when you give folks meaningful jobs, and they have the opportunity to do something day in and day out and then feed their families. There's definitely ripple effects. So you've traveled the length and breadth of what they call the heart-shaped country. You certainly know every corner of Sarajevo. What do you see as the richest, no pun intended, opportunities? As you say, diaspora folks and younger entrepreneurs are looking for ways to lift up the entire country, regardless of government and corruption. So what do you see as the sectors that are most appealing?
I mean, there are a lot of sectors that are underutilized. And you look at, for instance, farming. I mean, Bosnia has a lot of land, right? It's just not, that's not being utilized. And you, food production, that's one. Hydroelectric power. You have the service industry, for instance. There are a lot of businesses that could thrive in Bosnia. And you do have a capable workforce there, very hardworking people. So I think with the right tools, Bosnia can really could improve a great deal in the next 10, 20 years. What's holding Bosnia back in a lot of ways is, like I said, corruption, but also ethno-nationalism. You have very corrupt politicians, and you have one part of Bosnia, Republika Srpska, which is a smaller entity, where they're still, denying genocide. It is an apartheid-like environment there, where, if you cross into Republika Srpska, you see pictures of Vladimir Putin, big posters of him, and that sort of tells you where the government is trying to steer the people, not towards the West, but towards kind of Russia and China, which I think is the obviously wrong approach, because Bosnia is a Western country with Western values. And I think it's very important for the United States and the EU to be very engaged in Bosnia and to steer it in the right direction.
We have a really diverse group of participants, and then this will be posted online later this week. I am sure some of what you just said and what you've said over the last 20 minutes is going to elicit questions, and that's exactly why we're doing these. So I will call on the first question in a minute. It wouldn't, it seems like we could have this conversation almost any week, any month. With the following lead up. Can you comment on what happened in Sarajevo over the last few days? And specifically, I'm referring to the Bleiburg Mass that generated a lot of international news. On the one hand, it's always exciting and good when the region gets into the pages of the New York Times. On the other hand, too often it's
right.
stories that have something to do with history, and rather kind of the forward-looking entrepreneurial spirit that we were speaking of.
Well, we sure like to produce a lot of history, but unfortunately and very, very shamefully, so a mass was held to sort of commemorate the victims of Bleiburg. And so thousands of Bosnian citizens came out in protest amid COVID-19. They came out in their masks, and I think people are risking their lives to go protest this. Basically, there was a mass for Croatia's Nazi allied soldiers, and I think Sarajevo in Bosnia has such a huge anti-fascist spirit that people were compelled to come out against that. And unfortunately, during World War II, the Nazis killed over, I think, 7,000 of 10,000, 7,000 out of the 10,000 Jews that were living in Sarajevo. And to celebrate fascism is just not something that the citizens of Sarajevo are okay with. And I think they showed that, and they came out and protested. And this event is typically organized in Bleiburg, Austria each year, but because of coronavirus, it was canceled. So then the Archbishop decided to do it in Sarajevo. And I think there was also obviously something organized in Zagreb as well. But it was strongly condemned. Obviously, we condemn it. It was strongly condemned by many.
Uh-oh. Ajla, it seems that your video and your voice have paused. I'm going to let our first questioner pose a question, and then hopefully at that point, Ajla gets through whatever technical difficulties. Steve Rukavina is welcome to ask his question, and hopefully Ajla's able. She's actually logging back in as we speak. But Steve, you're the first question.
Okay. Thanks, Ari, and everyone. Ajla, and just before I ask you my question, I do just want to point out that, yes, there's a lot of history, and it's beyond complex in the former Yugoslavia. It should be pointed out, though, the majority of victims by Tito's partisans from May of 1945 to December were innocent civilians, ordinary peasants, members of the Domobran, and it was a minority of Ustasha, the Nazi collaborators. And so Cardinal Poljic, who said the Mass, was to honor the victims at Bleiburg, and it was not, you can't simplify it to say that it's just a Mass to honor Ustasha, because there would be no Mass if there were 25,000 Ustasha sympathizers that had a trial and were executed, there wouldn't be any Masses. But it's a little more complex than you simplified it to. But I wanted to ask you about the Dayton Peace Accord, and you correctly talked about how it wasn't meant to be a long-term constitutional document. But as you said, unfortunately, it's created the Republic of Srpska, which now snubs the national government and the judicial system and opposes NATO membership. Yes. We saw last month the Freedom House gave Bosnia and Herzegovina a 52 ranking when they analyzed democracies. And so, as you too pointed out, there has to be some reforms. There's a dysfunctionality of the present two-entity system, with 5 presidents and a zillion ministers and bureaucrats, and all entrenched, and I agree, with really an ethnocratic, feudal approach that still allows way too much corruption. So I've supported the Swiss-Belgium model for a long time. And Ajla, in your opinion, and I hope there's something positive, do you see any possible political steps, any reforms that are, gathering traction that will help even out some of these political, religious, economic inequalities within the 3 constituent peoples of Bosnia and Herzegovina? So what possible reforms can we hope for or look to support to create more of a equal opportunity and multi-ethnic society based on, the same rights for all and throughout the country?
I've seen Ajla join us and then disappear and then join us again.
I'm trying to talk.
Time with this because my computer just shut off for whatever the reason. So I do apologize, everyone.
Ajla, your computer's telling you not to be in the office.
I haven't been here in a long time.
You're in the heart of Washington, D.C. You're supposed to be abiding by the mayor's, I'm giving you a hard time. So
there's no one here, so there's that.
You definitely heard those Steve's points?
So I did. And I think, Steve, we're going to just have to disagree on Bleiburg. I think there has been, there's been a lot of revision of history in Croatia and even the world, let's take World Cup, for example, like congratulations on a historic win. Amazing. However, the team was, chanting these Ustasha pro-Nazi songs. There is that element of a revision of history. There is that element of kind of glorifying fascism, and we're just against it. I understand, you could say there's gray areas, and I do understand that, but it's just wrong. Tito was against fascism. He fought against the Nazis, and I'll just leave it at that. As far as Dayton, I think you were talking about, was it the Belgian model, or if I heard correctly? The thing is, the way it stands right now, the people that are suffering the most are your average Bosnians, because it gives power to Bosniaks, Serbs, Croats. But what if you are a Bosnian or a Roma or a Jew or anybody else? You can't run for presidency, and you don't have equal rights under the law. And that's an issue. And that was condemned by the European Court of Human Rights. However, Bosnia has not changed its constitution yet. And that simply must change. And I don't have a solution for you. I think if anyone had a solution, we would have had a better document by now. However, I will say that the way the power is dispersed at this moment, it just doesn't work for Bosnia, or for any country for that matter, because it's very undemocratic, and it violates human rights.
So I would once again encourage, we have a diverse group joining us today. If folks want to follow up and join into that discussion or take the discussion elsewhere, we have a little less than 20 minutes. In the meantime, bringing it back to Washington and relations between Sarajevo and Washington, I was heartened to see that someone you know well, the Congresswoman from Dallas, Eddie Bernice Johnson, had a dialogue with the U.S. Ambassador Nelson. And I'm just kind of curious if you could maybe speak to how Congresswoman Johnson got interested and involved, the launch of the Friends of Bosnia caucus in the Congress. And then certainly if you want to speak to the recent conversation that they had that was hosted by the U.S. Embassy, realizing you don't speak for the U.S. government, but you could provide some perspective on any of that.
Absolutely. So Congresswoman Johnson is our Democratic co-chair, and our Republican co-chair is Congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey. And she became involved in Bosnia because she took a trip with then President Clinton to Bosnia, and she got to meet with a lot of the victims of the war, with a lot of women. And she is a huge women's rights advocate. So we actually co-organize an event each year together with her office, Bosnian Women Stay on Capitol Hill. And that's really how she became involved. And she's been wonderful. She's really, really very supportive. And she, as you said, recently spoke with the current U.S. Ambassador to Bosnia, Ambassador Nelson, and they talked about Bosnia's response to COVID-19, about the upcoming anniversaries of Srebrenica genocide, as well as the Dayton Peace Accords. And I think they're supposed to actually have a follow-up conversation, so they're going to speak one more time in the coming week or two. And I think this also showcases that the Bosnia caucus is important. It's active, and members of Congress they do care about Bosnia. They want to see Bosnia progress. And I'm very proud of our Bosnian American diaspora for being so engaged with their members of Congress, because without them, obviously I'm sitting here in Washington and I can go to meetings, but I really, it's our diaspora that's involved and that's active in their local communities. And I think that's extremely valuable, and I really commend them for that.
To that point, I believe today is actually 170 days from Election Day. If it isn't, then it's a day or two off. The days kind of blur together in this pandemic period, but 170 days, less than 6 months. Certainly it's going to be contentious, dare I say historic. It all began in Iowa, which seems like ancient history. And my understanding is there's a very large and well-organized Bosnian American community in Iowa. And I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to that. I realize you're from Florida, but I think that might be of interest to folks listening in.
Yes, so there is a large Bosnian American community in Iowa. They're very active, and Alvir Klempic, whom you know, and he's on this call, he works for the Vice President Biden's campaign. He's a Bosnian American from Iowa, Srebrenica genocide survivor. So he's very, very active, and I'm very proud that he's involved, and he's really helped organize that community. And I know they were like historic. I mean, we've never had this before, but they caucused for Vice President Biden. So that was wonderful. And obviously we're not here to tell people who they should vote for. Bosnian Americans, they vote for both Republicans and Democrats. We have Bosnian Americans who support President Donald Trump. We have Bosnian Americans that obviously don't. That is not our job, but what we do want is for Bosnian Americans to vote, because democracy is not a spectator sport and you have to participate. And so that is something that we heavily advocate for.
I know other diaspora organizations are investing a lot of time and resources, and we mentioned a bit ago about the census. It happens every 10 years for those of us who are joining outside the United States. So even in the midst of this pandemic, we're doing a national count across somewhere in the neighborhood of 330 million Americans. Is that something that your organization's focused on, to get respondents to list themselves as Bosnian Americans?
Yes, so we definitely want Bosnians to list themselves as Bosnian Americans, because that would help obviously identify, we more or less know where Bosnian Americans are concentrated, but I think that would help a great deal. And that's something that we definitely are working on as well. And I just wanted to go back to what Steve was saying, and mention something a little along what we were talking about. So I don't know if you all know, but just recently in my hometown of Prijedor, there was graffiti that focused on these two notorious far-right organizations, Blood and Honor and Combat 18, and they were visible on various buildings across Prijedor. And they basically promote far-right ideas about Bosnia, a smaller entity, Republika Srpska, but they're also anti-Muslim, anti-Jew, anti-LGBT, and these two organizations were deemed as terrorist organizations by Germany and Canada. So that is something also that's sort of popping up in Bosnia, and that we need to be aware of and combat.
Well, thanks for flagging that for everyone. We have a lot of diverse participants on the line, and once again encourage folks in the next 10 minutes or so we have left. If they do have questions, as Steve had earlier, please feel free to raise your hand. I would be curious. I saw the announcement, and it's really incredible what's happened over the last few years. The airline Fly Bosnia, the national flag carrier, private airline of Bosnia. And they announced that after suspending on February 29th, they're going to relaunch. But all the flights that they're relaunching are headed south and east to places like Kuwait City and elsewhere. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there certainly in previous years has been, for want of a better term, deepening ties between the Gulf Arabs and Bosnian entrepreneurs and individuals, and certainly the government. So I was wondering if you could speak to that as someone who has spent considerable time in Sarajevo, because it is something that, once again, for want of a better term, the other side points to and refers to and suggests that the entire country is turning into a place like Kuwait. And by no means does Balkan Insider have a perspective on that, and I'm not even saying that's accurate, but it's out there, and it's a discussion that you hear too often.
Well, I would say that the Middle East, countries of the Middle East, invest more into countries like Serbia than Bosnia. And I think there is that Islamophobic element, because Bosnia does have a large Muslim population, that kind of gets pinned on Bosnia. Like, oh no, we have all these covered women coming to Sarajevo as tourists. Like, everyone is welcome. You know, people from Paris can come, London, China. I mean, you have people all over the world that come. And I think as far as Fly Bosnia, I don't know their business model. I'm not too familiar with the company. So I don't know why their flights are to Kuwait or wherever. Do I think they should broaden it? Yes, but does that work for their business model? I don't know. And I'm assuming they go where there is a demand, right? And if, you know, tourism from the Middle East is increasing, then I'm assuming that's where they will go. I think Bosnia welcomes all people and should, and everyone is welcome. And I hope everyone on this call visits Bosnia if you haven't. It really is a wonderful country. And I think it is a bit unfair and sad, and it is something that is used by, you know, as you said, the other side, and I would say anti-Bosnian elements within Bosnia to point out, oh, these people from the Middle East are coming and taking over. They're coming as tourists and they're leaving. So I guess that's what I have to say about that.
Well, thank you. We have 2 questions in the queue. I would just moderator's prerogative, as they say. Yeah, my father's a rabbi. I've not as many back roads as you've been on, Ajla, in Bosnia, but I think I've covered a lot of ground. I've led prayer services more than once in the synagogue in Sarajevo, and I certainly have felt welcome. And I do think that probably with the exception of Jerusalem, it's you know, Sarajevo is one of the most diverse cities in the world when we look at folks that are actively practicing their faith. In order of raising hands, quote unquote, these little blue hands, Richard Kramer wants to ask you a question.
Can you hear me?
We're good now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for pulling this event together today, Ari and Ajla, for your comments, your participation. You know, Turkey, both politically and economically, as Erdogan, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has consolidated his rule in AK Party governance in that country, have increasingly engaged in Bosnia. And it'd be interesting for me to hear from you the ways you think that Turkey has been helpful, and perhaps ways they could be even more helpful as we go through the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course the instability and also the economic underperformance that has characterized Bosnia unfortunately too much of late. Thank you. Thank
you, Richard. I would say a strong democratic Turkey is important for Bosnia, and that's what we would, I mean, I can just speak on behalf of the Advisory Council, but that's what we would like to see. We need more infrastructure, so investments when it comes to roads and schools and things, hospitals, things of that nature, as opposed to religious objects or things like that. And I think for a lot of, when it comes to Turkey, and Erdogan in particular, a lot of it is words. Turkey invests far more into Serbia and other countries than Bosnia. So I think that's something that's really important to highlight. They don't invest as much in Bosnia. And I think when he does travel there or says something, people think of it's more than it is, but I think Turkey could do more as far as those things are concerned. And like I said, we want to see a democratic, strong Turkey.
I would just follow up, and I'll admit I can't remember exactly when, but in the recent history, within the last 2 years, my recollection is that the largest political rally that Erdogan ever had outside of Turkey, and one of the largest public gatherings in Sarajevo's history, happened when Erdogan came. And once again, I'm hazing on exactly when, but I think it would be somewhat disingenuous to say, I mean, the man on the street in good chunks of Bosnia, Ajla, have, I don't want to say a reverence, but certainly an affinity for today's Turkey.
I mean, when I go to Bosnia and I talk to people, I think they see Turkey as, obviously it's a much wealthier country than Bosnia, and people travel there on vacations. So they go to the beach there. And they like it. It's quite, I mean, I've been there a couple of times. It's a lovely place. And I think that's sort of what people, that's the affinity. However, on the other hand, you know, in Republika Srpska, you have a strong affinity for Vladimir Putin, and a strong affinity for China, and a strong affinity for Viktor Orban and people like that. So I don't think that Turkey has played, and I think this is important to note, they haven't played some insidious role in Bosnia as Turkey, as Russia has, because you have Russian paramilitary soldiers, and Richard, you wrote a report about this, coming into Bosnia and creating a lot of unrest and a lot of it's a security issue for sure. And so I think from that perspective, if we're going to look at foreign countries and their influence on Bosnia, I would say the two greatest threats at the moment are Russia and China, not so much Turkey.
And if I may, just briefly to clarify, I didn't want to phrase that as Turkey as being a threat per se. Foreign countries get involved in domestic affairs of other nations. Some are more powerful than others, and there are very affirmative and useful ways that they can contribute.
Yes. Sometimes
ways that may be better serving the interests of that larger foreign power rather than a smaller domestic constituency in a country like Bosnia. That's all.
Right.
Thank you very much, Ajla.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to unmute David Pettigrew, and the floor is yours, David.
On my video. Okay. Thank you very much, Ari, for the discussion. I hope you can hear me. And also, I want to say hello to Ajla and thank her for all the good work she does. My question is related to your thoughts on the possibility and necessity of the development of a national law against, or real laws, I suppose, against genocide denial and against the glorification of convicted war criminals in Republika Srpska. The conditions for restorative justice would involve Republika Srpska taking responsibility for the crimes committed in its name. And the only other context I was thinking of for this question was that in January, Zlatko Miletic introduced an amendment in the House of Peoples, including both a law against genocide denial and against the glorification of war criminals. And it was, of course, defeated by a voting bloc, Serbian and Croatian voting bloc. But I think I think it's important in a post-genocide society to have such laws. So I wonder if you think if there's a possibility or a mechanism to encourage the High Representative. That would seem to be the only possibility of the imposition of such a law to implement it. These laws in the context of Bosnia emerging from suffering as in a post-genocide society. Was that coherent?
Thank you, Dr. Pettigrew. I agree that Bosnia definitely needs such law, but I think, as you said, there's so much denial and it's on the rise. And I think Republika Srpska is spending millions of dollars on or on efforts to discredit and to deny genocide, where the truth is genocide happened in Srebrenica. It's a well-proven fact. It's based on science, court proceedings, court rulings. It's based on thousands of testimonies. So there is no, it's a fact. And it is something that is sadly used to continue this notion of victimhood, and to say, well, this didn't happen, and to continue to spread misinformation and propaganda throughout Republika Srpska, Bosnia, Serbia, and just the wider region. And I sort of get tired sometimes on always, saying, well, this person denies genocide. These people, in the grand scheme of things, in a way, that these people are irrelevant. They're on the wrong side of history. But at the same time, they should be named and shamed, because it is wrong. And we as a society, all of us who stand with the victims and against any sort of genocide denial, it is really up to us to stand up to these people and to stand with the victims, and especially to stand with those who are no longer here to speak for themselves. And Dr. Pettigrew, thank you for all that you do to ensure that people in the United States and around the world learn about the Srebrenica genocide and everything that's happened to Bosnia's non-Serb population.
Ajla, well said. We have hit the 45-minute mark. I'll let you have the last word. Before then, for those of us who want to learn more and who want to immerse themselves, dare I say, please log on to balkaninsider.com, sign up for the morning newsletter. It's free, it's completely unbiased, and provides headlines primarily focused on politics, policy, and business, to a small degree pop culture, from the capitals, from Slovenia down through Kosovo. And we are cooking up, stay tuned, you'll see it mentioned in the newsletter in the very near future, programming as early as next week. Now that we've done a survey of the different diaspora organizations, we're moving on to different tiers of programming, and we look forward to everyone joining those. But Ajla, as promised, the last word is yours.
Well, thank you, Ari, and thank you for hosting me and the Advisory Council for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I would just like to say that, we, as I said, we advocate on behalf of the Bosnian American community, and we want to see Bosnia become a member of NATO. We believe that we want to foster even stronger ties between Bosnia and the United States, and we are 100% against historical revisionism and genocide denial of any kind. We, there are, when it comes to that kind of stuff, there simply are no gray areas. And I think the region is moving in a very dangerous direction when it comes to these alternative facts that have now become very, very popular, not just in Bosnia, but here and all over the world. And it's up to us to put an end to that, because the future looks very bleak for little kids today if that's the direction that we're heading in. So the Advisory Council is very proud to stand with victims and survivors of the Srebrenica genocide, of ethnic cleansing throughout Bosnia, and we advocate for our community and for those that believe in a united, multi-ethnic, democratic Bosnia. And so, with that said, thank you once again, and please visit our website to learn more about our work. And